Hey folks, it's Ray at DCRainmaker.com, and today I've got 13 differences between the Garmin Fenix 7 series and the Garmin Epix. Now I've been using these watches literally side by side, one on one wrist, the other on the other wrist, days at a time, long hikes, long rides, all that kind of stuff, to be able to figure out where those exact differences are. In this video, I'm gonna go through all of those nuances, including things like battery burn charts on 7+ hour rides and 5 and 6 hour hikes, to show you exactly how much battery the different units are using in real world configuration. Now for this video, I wanna be laser focused on the differences between Fenix and Epix. So I'm not gonna go through all the 20 different models of the Fenix 7 and explain them all to you. Instead, all you need to know is there are 3 sizes of the Fenix 7. There's the S, the middle one, and the X. In the case of the Epix, it matches identically the size and the viewable screen, as I'll show you later on, of the middle one, the Fenix 7. There is no solar offered on the Epix, so it's only available on the Fenix 7 series, and there's Sapphire offered on both Epix as well as the Fenix 7, and in both cases, that simply gets you sapphire glass, a nicer bezel, 32 gigs of storage as opposed to 16 gigs of storage, primarily for maps, and then also multi-band GPS, which gets you theoretically higher or more accurate GPS tracks, primarily in really tricky situations like cliffs and stuff like that. And I cover all the nuances of those tiers and those models up in my full Fenix 7 in-depth review up in the corner there, but they don't matter much in the context of this particular video. But then we get to whether or not you want Epix or Fenix 7, and that's what these next 13 things are about. And the first one is the price. In the case of the price, the Fenix 7 base unit starts at $699 US and goes well over $1,000. In the case of Epix, it starts at $899 and goes to $999. Now, for the rest of the video at this point, I'm just going to compare these middle two. This is the Fenix 7 Sapphire and the Epix Sapphire. And the reason for that, of course, is that they're the exact same size. Same case size, same screen size, all that kind of stuff. I'm assuming that if you got this far, you kind of figured out that's probably the size that you want, versus if you want one of the other sizes, well, you can't make this choice between Epix and not, because there is no Epix size beyond just this one unit right here. So let's start talking about some of the differences between the Fenix 7 and the Epix. The first one is the display in terms of always on or not. So in the case of the Fenix 7, you can see the screen right there. This is always on. No matter what I'm doing, 24 hours a day, this screen stays precisely the same. Versus Epix, it's got different states that it goes through. So there's two core options that you have in Epix. You can do either always on, which means that the screen is always on at different brightness levels depending on what you're doing, or you can have gesture based. So always on is what I primarily use, meaning that the screen will always show something. Right now it's in the dim state, and then as I raise my wrist, it will go to the bright state. So like this, it'll be dimmed, but the screen is always on. And as I raise it up, it goes to the full brightness, but I can see it either way. Like as you saw right there, back in the dim state, no problem at all. Now, if I leave it on a table like this, it'll actually turn off entirely. But when you're wearing it, you have constant movement. Even the tiniest bit of movement will turn it on. So it's always on in that practical sense. Versus gesture-based means that that gesture goes between off and on. So down like this, the screen will be off, and I raise my wrist, and it goes to on. In that case, you may have a slight delay there, so you might notice that more. The battery, though, implications are huge. In always on, you get 6 days of battery life with Epix, versus gesture-based, you get 16. On the Fenix side, of course, you have this giganto battery chart, depending on which model you have, and solar or not solar. But I think most of us would agree, like day-to-day battery life on a Fenix series isn't really a limiter we're concerned about. And actually, just a quick note, if you're finding this video interesting and useful, go ahead and whack that like button down the bottom there. It really does help out this video and the channel quite a bit. Next, of course, we've got the biggie, which is the display technology. In the case of the Fenix 7 here, it is a transflective MIPS technology, the same thing that we've seen for many, many years from Garmin. In the case of the Epix, it is an AMOLED display. That's the same display type they've used in the Venue series. Now, what do those terms mean? Well, essentially a ton more resolution and a ton more colors. The Epix screen there has 65,000 colors. The Fenix 7 screen has 64 colors. Not thousands, just 64 colors. That's it. Now, both screens are 1.3 inches, I mentioned, and they're both identical in terms of the actual viewable portion. So you can see here, if I take my handy dandy little measuring meter out, the portion inside the solar ring right there is identical, so 32.4-ish or so meters, or millimeters, sorry, not meters. And then on the Epix here, it is also identical inside on the actual viewable screen. So with those different screen technologies, we have different resolutions. If we look again at all 4 different units side by side, Epix is 416 by 416, so dramatically more resolution. That in turn leads to more pixels per inch. So the Fenix 7 series across the board is 200 pixels per inch. It's the same because the screen size increases as the resolution increases, versus the Epix is 326 pixels per inch. Now, of course, that all sounds pretty techy, and it is kind of techy, but what matters is what you do with that tech, and that gets us straight into the next one, which is things like map visibility. Now, looking at this side by side is a great way to show the differences. These are both configured identically with the defaults. And at first glance, you see obviously the Epix is much brighter, but you may not notice there's actually more detail there. And let's zoom in just twice here. There we go, once, twice, actually 3 times, sorry. And I want you to notice how on the Epix, there's a trail up at the top there that does simply not yet appear on the Fenix 7, because they don't have the resolution to do that. They don't have the pixels to actually show that yet. So we have to go again deeper once. Let's see if we scroll up, do we see it yet? There we go. Now we can see that trail right there. And this is, of course, shown in countless places around the user interface and around the maps. This is also true of other sports as well. For example, in golf, you're going to see more detail. And then also in the case of skiing, you're going to see those particular runs at a higher zoom level. Again, the actual map data is identical between the two of them under the hoods. Now, of course, if we look at the screens again right now, it takes us right into the next one, which is brightness. Now, clearly, the Epix is brighter. Without question, the backlight is off on the Fenix 7. I tap it. Now it's on a default configuration. And I tap the Epix, and that's on a default configuration. So super, super bright. But then the question becomes, what about outdoors? And unquestionably outdoors in every scenario I've tested, both crazy bright sun on top of a volcano and lava fields, as well as down in the trees or just living in dark, damp Netherlands here, it's brighter on Epix. So if we look at, for example, these photos right here, these are side by side in default configurations. So I had either the backlight enabled or disabled to match on both of these. Epix blows away the Fenix 7 Sapphire in every scenario, and it's pretty impressive. So that then gets us straight to the next question. What about brightness being too bright? So how dim can you make it when you want to go to sleep, for example? Now, in the case of Epix, the way this works is that it goes into a sleep mode at night based on what you defined, typically for like do not disturb periods. So for example, either 10 or 11 p.m., whatever you set, the screen will actually turn off. And if you want to turn the screen back on again, you just tap a button. You can also go into sleep mode whenever you want by just holding up into the controls mode right there. Sleep mode equals on. And then you see it just automatically dim the screen even further in that sleep mode. And then this is the sleep mode watch face. So it's a very clean black watch face with just some tiny white lettering on it, or kind of thin white lettering on it. And this is also available, by the way, on the Fenix 7 if you wanted to enable it that way too. So again, controls menu, sleep mode. And you can see that there. You also saw it dimmed that backlight. The backlight goes down from the default 20% to 5%. And if you want to wake up the screen, you just press a button and you can see it again, and you can see the time. And it's not overly bright. So in a dark room, this isn't going to blind somebody like a typical AMOLED display would be. It's kind of full brightness up. In fact, if we look at the sleep mode options here, you go down into that, and you can see if we go down to the backlight, you have down to 5%, so basically 20 different levels of brightness on the backlight in sleep mode. And on the backlight of the display on the AMOLED unit, on the Epix, you have 4 different levels. And these are, of course, totally configurable. So you can choose the times, the dates, if it does it at all, for example, how long it times out, whether or not the touch is disabled or enabled for both units. So all of that sleep mode stuff is simply in the pursuit of better battery life. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So battery life is basically divided into 2 rough camps. You have smartwatch mode and you have GPS mode. So in smartwatch mode, the Epix goes for 6 days in always on, up to 16 days in gesture based, and the Fenix 7 goes like many, many days to many, many weeks, depending on which model you have, and there's many, many models, thus the chart right here. In my testing on the Epix, in terms of day-to-day smartwatch mode in always on, without a question, it hits the 6 days almost precisely every single time, and I'm doing 1 hour workout every single day, so pretty normal usage. And in the Fenix 7 side, the numbers trended about where I expected them to be as well, depending on which model I was using. So that then gets to the workout times. And of course, that's a piece that you're probably most interested, primarily from like an endurance standpoint. Can these watches hold up to really long activities? So I'm going to show you a couple different core activities here that I think are a good representation of really putting it to the test. The first one is a 7-hour ride I did. Now in this case, I wore the Epix on my left wrist, the Fenix 7 on my right wrist, and I went and turned on basically all the options. So on this ride, I had mapping enabled, so a course loaded, I had Climb Pro enabled, I had multi-band GPS, so the highest dual frequency GPS options you could. I had optical heart rate enabled, I had a power meter connected for my bike, I had live tracking enabled, as well as notifications, smartphone notifications from my phone, spitting out those all day long. So essentially everything was on, and it was also in an always on configuration for Epix. So with all the settings you could possibly turn on, how did the battery life do? This is a chart right here from the DCR analyzer. It allows you to go ahead and analyze the fit files and spits out the actual battery usage that was written to the file. And then from there, we can also show estimates of what that would have projected to look like over the entire range of the battery. You can use that tool if you want yourself. The link's down in the description there with files from plenty of different vendors, not just Garmin files. Now what you see there is the Epix decreased 32%, from 92% the starting point down to 59%. So again, a 32% decrease, while the Fenix 7 Sapphire Solar decreased from 98% down to 77%, a 21% decrease. Now keep in mind, it was an exceptionally sunny day, but I was also down in the forest for a couple hours, getting out of the forest up to the upper levels above the tree line, at which point it was all sun all the time. And of course, plenty of sun, generally 100,000 to 150,000 lux conditions, so that would have helped the Fenix 7 Solar's battery. So looking at that, you can see that our estimated capacity of the Epix, if all things stayed the same, was about 22 hours, 21.72 hours. In the case of the Fenix 7, it was 34 hours. Now, interestingly, both of these are beyond Garmin's estimates on their official charts, and I think there's probably a couple different reasons for that. In the case of the Fenix 7 Solar, it had better sun. It's as simple as that. Garmin's estimates assume 50,000 lush conditions for 3 hours. I was out there for more than 3 hours, and I was in way sunnier than 50,000 lux conditions. In the case of Epix, most of these data charts, battery charts, were created like a month and a half, 2 months ago, and since then the firmware's gotten considerably better. In fact, I've seen that in my testing over the past month and a half. The rates and battery consumption rates that I've seen have gotten dramatically better up to the final production firmware, which is what these battery charts are on right now. The next battery chart I have for you is a 5 or so hour hike, and this was mostly under jungle cover for the vast majority of it, with pretty much overcast skies the entire day. And you can see there the Epix estimated capacity at about 19 hours over the course of that entire hike, if you were to kind of trend that, and the Fenix 7 down to about 21 hours. Now again, keep in mind, these are all the options turned on. This is virtually everything you can turn on this watch to burn as much battery as you can, as fast as you can. So this is like a worst case scenario. In this case, it didn't have that extra solar power, so it's gonna go ahead and burn more. Also, the GPS is gonna have to do more work because it's under the trees, this tree cover, this canopy, the vast majority of the time. Thus in turn, it burns more battery. The point here being that you can go out and do a 20-hour activity with either unit with all the things possibly turned on in the highest possible modes, or you could turn some things off, like go from multi-band GPS to more normal GPS, and that would save a ton. To turn off always on display and go to gesture based, that would save a ton. To turn off the optical heart rate sensor if you needed to and use a chest band, that would save a ton. There are plenty of different things you can do on both units that will save considerable battery if you needed to go even beyond that. Okay, so let's get away from battery life and displays and talk about something totally different, the flashlight. Now, you know, of course, that the Fenix 7X has that flashlight, double tap that, turns on, right? Pretty cool stuff. It's super useful out in the trails and things like that for just a little bit of added extra visibility. But what you probably didn't know is so does the Epix. So watch this. I just simply tap that right there. Flashlight. And also, by the way, the Fenix 7 Series 2. Now in this super brightly lit studio with like 20 different lights around me, probably doesn't look super impressive like that. And of course you can decrease the brightness here and even go into a red mode if you want to for a little bit less sort of in your face look. Of course, at the same time, this brightness level here won't do much out in the trails. Like you can't illuminate much in front of you. It's really more for like confined spaces around the house versus the 7X can quite easily illuminate the trail ahead of you as you run along. Next, what about accuracy? Now this is gonna be a quick and easy one. They're identical. Side by side, I've worn these watches and they're virtually identical in terms of heart rate because it's the same optical heart rate sensor chip. But given the case size the same, that also I found the actual results out in the trails identical as well as indoors and everywhere else the same. GPS accuracy, also the same. It's the exact same GPS chipset. The only difference that I've ever seen is simply due to wearing out one side versus the other. For example, running next to a big building on my right-hand side, the right-hand side one will be worse. When I turn back around again and go the other way, the left-hand side will be the worst because it's, again, next to the building. So next we get to pixel burn-in. Is that a concern of the Epix? And certainly, it's a potential concern, but I don't think it's a big or realistic concern for the vast majority of use cases. Now, pixel burn-in is when you have something like a really bright image that's turned on at full brightness and left on the screen, usually for long periods of time. Versus on the Fenix 7 series, that type of screen has no issues with pixel burn-in. It just simply doesn't happen. Now, in the case of Epix, Garmin does a few things to mitigate that. One, they do something called pixel shifting, which slightly moves the pixels just a little bit, turning them on and off so that you don't see it in your eyes at all, but it's helping the display to keep from a single given pixel from being illuminated the entire time and potentially burning in. Then, of course, you've got the sleep mode. So that's turning off the display entirely overnight to, again, prevent burn-in. If we look at the display technology, it's the exact same screen as the Venue 2. We haven't heard of any issues there, though it's only been out about 9 months or so, so maybe a bit too soon. It's a different screen, though, the original Venue, which we have seen some burn-in issues. So this may be like a longer-term thing, but I'm not super concerned about it at this point in time based on Garmin having a bit of history now with these watches and knowing how to mitigate it. Okay, we got 2 final items here, and these will be quickies. The first one is the weight. Now, of course, if you're comparing, the Fenix 7X or the 7S, those have dramatically different weights. But what if you're comparing just Sapphire to Sapphire, or 2 units that are virtually identical? So starting off with the Epix right there, so make sure that you can see that. That is 71 grams. I'll put that on there. Got that. And then we have the Fenix 7 Sapphire at 74 grams. So a mere 3 grams of difference. I don't think you're going to notice that, but maybe you might. And of course, you could then change up the bands if you wanted to something else, and that would change the weight and all that kind of goodness. Then the last item is a really tiny one, but it's worthwhile mentioning, which is that in the case of Epix, it actually has a slightly different Connect IQ version than the Fenix 7 series. And in fact, it's not really even a version. The version is still considered Connect IQ System 5. However, there are additional features on the Epix that are available because of the display. So in other words, features that can light up the resolution of that display and the image quality of that display that simply cannot happen on the Fenix 7 because there isn't those colors or that resolution. Okay, so there you go, a complete side-by-side comparison between these two and all the features. What is my take on it? Well, for me and what I do, I prefer the Epix, mainly because I'm not generally going out and doing more than 20 or 30 hours at a time in an activity. So I don't really have to worry about that kind of battery life long term. And I don't mind charging my watch once a week. I'm totally fine with that. And if I am doing like a bunch of days back to back of crazy hikes and stuff like that, if I have to charge it every couple of days, that's also fine with me too. Of course, there's also challenges with the Epix. For myself, for example, I do prefer a smaller watch. And so I traditionally don't wear a watch this big. I usually wear like the Forerunner 745, which is a lot smaller watch. So if you don't want to watch this big or don't want to watch this small compared to the 7X, then this won't work for you. And again, also on the battery front, if you do plan to do frequent, very long activities and don't want to deal with a charging cable and all that kind of goodness, then in that case, Epix probably doesn't make sense for you either. Hopefully you found this interesting or useful. If so, go ahead and like that like button at the bottom there or hit subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. With that, have a good one.